early morning rain, with a dollar in my hand and an aching in my heart, and my pockets full of sand. I'm a long way from home, and I miss my loved ones so. In the early morning rain, with no place to go, out on runway number 9, 707 said go. But I'm stuck here on the ground, where the cold wind blows. Now the liquor tastes good, and the women all the time. Well, there she goes, my friend, she's rolling down the line. It's mighty near, she's a silver wind. She's away westward bound, far above the clouds she'll fly, where the morning rain don't fall, and the sun always shines. She'll be flying over my home in about 3 hours' time. This old airport's got me down, it's no worth a good to me, 'cause I'm stuck here on the ground, holding drugs out of me. And jump that plane like a can of freight train. So I best be on my way. So I best be on my way. Early morning.
Good morning, or afternoon, or evening, depending on where you're logging in from, and welcome to the celebration of life for a very special man, Alfred Merrill Worden. And that's the last time we'll use his formal name, because if you're at this event today, you've probably heard him say, "Just call me Al." It's a beautiful September morning here in New York. My name is Tom Kallman, the President and CEO of Kallman Worldwide and the Endeavor Scholarship Foundation. And on behalf of my organization, and especially Al's family, thank you for joining us today. We're here to celebrate the life of an amazing man, a friend, a father, grandfather, brother, an American hero who, though he died at age 88, his vigor and zest for life left us all with the feeling that he was taken too soon. I was with Al several weekends while he was in the hospital and rehab in the weeks before he died, and I could see his brilliant engineering mind trying to work out what was going on with his body, trying desperately to work it out. And as he asked me on 2 different occasions, "What do I have to do to get out of here?" Al, his doctors, his daughter Allison, and family members, friends from all phases of his life, visiting, phoning, and writing, we all did what we could to see him through it. But in the end, in the early morning hours of March 18th, 2020, Al Worden slipped this early bonds of earth for the last time, leaving behind the world that he often struggled to understand, but whose life, and certainly his lunar experiences, gave him perspective on that we mortals can only imagine. I have the honor of hosting Al's celebration of life, something I would never have expected, as I only first spoke with Al Worden in 2014 and then met him in 2015. Today, we'll hear from friends and family that have known Al for nearly 9 decades and been with him to the moon and back. It's not the length of time I knew Al that afforded me this privilege, but the fact that the time Al and I did spend together, especially since the creation of the Endeavor Scholarship, was not focused only on Al's glory days as the Apollo 15 command module pilot, but future focused on a world made better through international friendship and learning. In 2015, my company was looking for a goodwill ambassador that could both support the U.S. aerospace industry at our international air shows, but also help us engage and inspire international students in what we called a nation-to-nation, people-to-people outreach. I had no idea how well Al would take to both of those roles, and in the 5 years that followed, we traveled to 8 countries on 4 continents in pursuit of our mission. During that time, we met with heads of state, royal families, government and industry leaders, and fellow astronauts that came out of the woodwork to meet and spend time with an Apollo legend. And then there were the kids. Kids and more kids. Students of all ages. In Dubai, Abu Dhabi, England, France, Bahrain, China, Poland, Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Everywhere we went, we met with them in schools, science fairs, and air shows. And I can tell you that whether we were meeting a prince or a classroom full of students, Al treated them all the same, with the same kindness and respect we'll hear so much about during this event. You know, if you Google, how do you run a virtual celebration of life, there really isn't a lot of precedent or best practices we can follow. But Al's daughter, Allison Penzak, and our team, including Francis French and Vic Southgate, thought we'd ask family members and friends to share some stories and ways that Al impacted their lives. We've blended those interviews in with 1 or 2 special features, but we know we'll never be able to adequately portray the fullness and richness, breadth and depth of Al's contribution in our lives in just 1 hour. You may have seen just before we came on the air posts from the hundreds of individuals who met Al and wanted to be part of the tribute. Thank you to all who have contributed to today's event. In the interest of time, we had to truncate some videos and certainly didn't get a chance to use many of those that were sent to us. Everything we've received can be viewed in its entirety at the URLs and Facebook locations that are shown on the screen below. Please take a look, and if you haven't had the chance to post something yet and want to, those links could be found there as well. Obviously, it would have been wonderful for all of us to gather together in Houston and to don our Hawaiian shirts, as Al often did, and to share our favorite Al Worden stories. But of course, COVID-19 makes that impossible. That said, Al had so many friends and admirers around the world that in some respects his virtual gathering may be even better, as it is allowing Al's friends to participate today from Singapore, Japan, China, Abu Dhabi and Dubai, 7 countries in Europe that we're aware of, Chile, and all around the United States. So whatever time zone you're in right now, it's kind of cool and very telling that the world is united today by our dear friend Al Worden. Before we really get into this, however, if you haven't already done so, go to your closet and get out your wildest Hawaiian shirt and put it on the chair next to you. Or better still, put it on, as Al was always comfortable in one of those aloha specials of his. We'll run a 30-second montage of Al and his Hawaiian finest while you go get your shirt on. Excellent. Welcome back. One last thing. If you're in a time zone where it's 5 o'clock, and we all know it's 5 o'clock somewhere, consider pouring yourself an Al Worden vodka and cranberry juice. And let's sit back and enjoy an hour remembering, rejoicing, and celebrating Al Worden. During the dozens of Al Worden presentations I attended, Al often told his own story by starting where he started, on a farm in Michigan. We're honored to have with us today Al's sister Carolyn and kid brother Jerry, who were also there when Al Worden was becoming Al Worden
My honor to share a few memories of Al and our family with you all today. I've thought about what I can say for several weeks, and this is what I came up with. First, the Worden family. Let me give you a little background on us. Our dad, Tiny, was a movie projectionist his whole working life. Our mom, Helen, was a stay-at-home mom when we were young. Having 6 kids was her full-time job. First in line was Sally, then Sonny, or Al. A year later, Carolyn, me. There were just the 3 of us for about 5 years, and then Jim came along. After another 5 years, there was Jerry, and shortly after him came Pete. So that was the lineup, almost 2 families of 3 and 3. Second, the years we 3 older ones remember the most. It was when we lived in the country from our early teens through high school. And here's a tidbit for you. Sonny, his name back then, and I went to a little one-room school. The grades went from 1st to 8th. He was in the 7th and I was in the 6th. As a couple of the older students, we helped the younger ones, mostly with reading and spelling. In the warmer months, we would all go outside at lunchtime and play ball, and even the teacher went. And when it was cold and snowy, we would all go out sledding on a hill that was behind the school. Sonny's job back then was to get to school early in the morning, get the fire going in the big furnace in the back of the room. And then we could sit around the furnace and put our feet up on the rim to keep warm. There was a pump outside for water and 2 outhouses. And to think that years later, he went to the moon. Third, our Norman Rockwell life. I think of our years growing up and our family life, and to me, it's like a Norman Rockwell painting. There were the big holiday dinners, usually with a few extra people, the good china, Dad carving the turkey, the steamed pudding that Mom made. Or, how about our Saturday mornings when we had our regular jobs to do before we could go anywhere? Sally and I cleaning the kitchen and in general spiffing up the house, and Sonny playing the piano for us. When we were older, we went to high school in town. Sonny had his own car by then. I don't remember how that came about. It was just a clunker, but he managed to keep it running. He was popular in high school, president of the student body, he played in a small dance band, and he was a friend to everyone. There were times that we went to the school dances together. We would meet up with our friends, but we also liked to dance together, and we were good. At the end of the evening, he would find me, and home we would go. Our mom always wanted to know where we were going, when we would be home. Dad always made sure we had enough money to call him if we had a problem. Mom was always awake when we got home. Usually she was in bed reading, waiting for all of her chicks to get home. So I will close with this. We Worden kids had a great life. We were so blessed. Our parents managed to instill in all 6 of us good values, honesty, integrity, and a great sense of humor, and a love of movies. And last of all, he was my hero long before he was yours. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Al's brother, Jerry, and I am grateful for the opportunity to share a few memories of Al with you today. It is hard to put these comments into the past tense, as his life was so full and his enthusiasm for living was so great. My memories of Al date back to a time well before he was famous. Before he became a world traveler, an Apollo astronaut, a test pilot, and a scientist. There was a time when he was just an ordinary person. He was called Sonny and grew up in a modest middle-class family in Michigan. He was not fond of the nickname Sonny. However, I don't recall calling him Al until long after he had left home and was well on his journey through life. My sisters still referred to him as Sonny. While everyone knew he was special, no one could have guessed that the journey he started from this humble beginning in Michigan would take him to the moon and back. For some perspective, Mom and Dad were married the year of the Great Depression, a somewhat inauspicious beginning to say the least. Through thick and thin, the Depression, World War II, they raised their family on a small farm. Values of honesty and integrity, perseverance, self-determination, and respect for others were ingrained in us all. Al was born in 1932 and was number 2 in a family of 6 children, including an older sister, Sally, a younger sister, Carolyn, and 3 younger brothers, Jim, me, and Pete. Al was definitely the alpha male of the family and carried a large share of responsibility for working the farm and helping out with raising such a large family. While tending to his chores on the farm, Al began to develop his talents and aspirations for music, for leadership, and academic achievement. He was an excellent piano player, and he played in a small polka band in town and the high school dance band. He and Carolyn were especially fond of dancing and would frequently attend high school dances together. She said, "He was handsome, gregarious, charming, and a great dancer. What's not to like?" Al was her hero. His popularity and academic standing in high school soon led to his election as student body president. In this role, he worked closely with the school principal, Mr. Holman, who took great personal interest in Al's career planning and became a lifelong friend and mentor. After Apollo 15, Al returned to the high school and presented Mr. Holman and the student body with an American flag that had flown around the moon. It was a touching, emotional moment for the school, for the endearing principal, and for the erstwhile student who had traveled so far. Allow me to share just a few of my personal memories of Al, his character, his sense of humor, and his influence on me. I remember going into our barn with Al a few nights before he left for West Point. I must have been about 6 years old. In the total darkness, he delighted in scaring me with a flashlight shining up onto his frightful, ghoulish face. We both laughed as he chased me around the barn. A few years later, at his West Point graduation, I remember the eagerness with which he abandoned the cadet trappings he had become so accustomed to. Jim and I returned to his room with him after graduation while he changed his clothes one last time. The folks waited at the car. Coming from a family with no excess or lavish lifestyles, I was shocked when he threw his cadet socks and other clothes right into the trash can. He had abandoned cadet life and was eagerly preparing for an Air Force career, one of many transitions he would face in his purpose-driven life. Our families enjoyed the lakes and water skiing in Michigan very much. Al also loved to water ski. So when he could, he would bring his family to Michigan and we would all meet at the lake. As brothers often do, we challenged each other on the water to see if we could dump each other. We were usually successful. What great fun we had. After a full day of water skiing, we would gather around the fire for a large family corn roast and a few cold drinks. We enjoyed those idyllic summer weekends and thought they would never end. These are great memories for us. For me, Al was not just a brother, but a superhero. I met several of Al's classmates and Air Force buddies through my career in the Air Force, and they too would regale me with stories, usually flying stories, revealing their great admiration and respect for the man that was my brother. One story in particular sticks with me. This story was fondly recalled to me by Lieutenant General George Monahan, a classmate and close friend of Al's at West Point. General Monahan at that time was the director of the Missile Defense Agency, for which I worked at the time. General Monahan told me that Al had won a prestigious award for a military competition at West Point. The competition involved many different combat skills and athletic fitness. Al's victory earned him the respect of all his classmates, as well as a very fancy watch. He was, they would say, really something. What a perfectly sublime compliment. I could go on, but I must close. We have lost a giant in our family. I stand in awe of his achievements and will miss him very much. My entire family extends our deepest sympathies to Allison, Merrill, Tammy, and their families. Bon voyage, my brother. Your next transition has begun.
Thank you, Carolyn. You're definitely Sonny's fan club member number 1. And Jerry, what great memories you have of him chasing you around that barn. God bless you both. Thank you for sharing with us today. Towards the end of his life, Al moved back to Houston to be closer to his friends and all that Houston has to offer. Most importantly, to be closer to his daughter Allison Penzak and her family there. We're grateful to have them with us today to reflect on their special lives with Al Worden.
When I was growing up in the 1960s, I was one of the kids fascinated by the space program. I lived about 6 miles from Bethpage, New York, where Grumman was building the lunar excursion module that would soon land the first men on the moon. I even had exciting brushes with astronauts, like when Rusty Schweikert, who flew on Apollo 9, came and visited my Boy Scout troop, or when I got Alan Shepard's autograph at the Super Bowl in Rice Stadium in Houston in 1974, which I thought was a fitting venue, as it was the same stadium where 12 years earlier, President John F. Kennedy had laid the bold challenge to send a man to the moon by decade's end. I, like many of my generation, wanted to become an astronaut myself, but I soon discovered I was too tall, I was colorblind so I couldn't fly at night, and as my family and friends will attest, I've got a terrible sense of direction. Little did I know that my connection to the space program would take a far different path. Fast forward 3 decades, when I was minding my own business, making a presentation to a professional group, when a pretty, smart, and funny audience member called me up a few weeks later and asked me out on a date. Well, we met, we fell in love, and a year later, we were engaged to be married. So shortly before the wedding, not only did I have to experience the scary notion of meeting my future father-in-law for the first time, but my future father-in-law was one of only 24 humans who had been to the moon. After meeting him, I had a better idea of why he and the others in the space program were then and still are my heroes. Until the last year of his life, we never lived in the same town, but that didn't stop us from spending a lot of time with Al and Jill. We were fortunate enough to see them a few times a year, mostly around the holidays, or at astronaut events or other special occasions. But it seemed that at every get-together with Al was a special occasion. Despite his extraterrestrial journey, he was always accessible, and if you forgive the pun, pretty much down to earth. He made being a son-in-law pretty painless, and it was very cool. Al never balked when I asked him to make a presentation to our son's Boy Scout or Cub Scout groups, and where he always fascinated bunches of wide-eyed boys about the marvels of space. He was always generous with his time, especially if it had to do with kids or with the STEM programs. That's probably why he was a regular guest on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood so many times. He was a kind grandfather, always relishing the times with the grandkids, especially if it involved towing the kids behind his boat when they were younger. Or even a few years ago, inviting our older son, Will, and one of his friends to watch him be filmed in 3D in Los Angeles for one of his projects. When the Smithsonian published Falling to Earth, his book, our family traveled to DC to watch him speak and sign autographs and answer the same questions he'd asked a million times as if he'd never been asked before. How do you go to the bathroom in space? There was the time of one summer day in Michigan when he took his boat out to a remote island and after a walk on the beach with the family, returned to the place we'd come ashore only to find the boat adrift about 50 yards from the shore. The Eagle Scout who had tied the faulty knot had to jump in the water and retrieve the escaped boat, and Al never pitched a fit or gave me the stink eye. Grace under pressure, as always. I was fortunate enough to work with him a few times on some business projects, and when my company hired him to be a spokesperson for a new technology, or last year when he delivered a speech that we'd worked on together. It was called Everything I Learned About Business, I Learned on the Way to the Moon. It was one of the few times in our 25 years together I even felt close to being his equal. But for all the fancy events we'd attended and all the times I'd seen him speak on stage, mesmerizing audiences with his knowledge or his stories, my most cherished moments of being with Al were on his porch in Gun Lake in Michigan. We talk about current events, but skillfully avoid talking about politics or about the kids or about his next trip. It was in those moments I didn't think of him as being a famous person, but just as my friend and as a great father-in-law and a great grandfather. And whatever trepidation I'd had about meeting him 25 years ago had all vanished. Yeah, it was cool to have an American hero as a father-in-law, but it was even cooler to have Al, the man, be part of my life and I be part of his family. I want to leave you with some words from Al's book of poetry called Hello Earth, a passage that he wrote that I think is appropriate for our relationship. It goes like this: Earth, a distant memory seen in an instant of repose, crescent-shaped, ethereal, and beautiful. I wonder which part is home, but I don't know. I know it doesn't matter. The bond is there in my heart and in my memory.
Relationships. That's the final frontier. My dad chose a career that, back in the 60s, was less than conducive to growing a family. Our family settled in a cul-de-sac in Nassau Bay by the Johnson Space Center, surrounded by other astronauts and their families. My dad then devoted himself to his new pursuit with undivided attention. The demands of the job kept Dad away from home for such long periods of time, I hardly knew him. When we did spend time together, everyone said I was the apple of his eye. But I always felt more like the mortal child of a superhero. I adored him and wanted nothing more than to win his love and respect. People often ask me if I was scared when my dad went to the moon. I tell them I was so excited and relieved and proud of him. I didn't think about the risks involved because my dad worked so hard for that opportunity. That was everything to him. It is the thing that I admired about him the most. But it did mean that my dad and I lost out on many father-daughter moments. My parents called it quits when I was 9, shortly before the launch of Apollo 15. They sat me down and said nothing was going to change. I knew that wasn't true. Sure enough, after that came longer separations and lack of communication. I longed for a closer bond with him, but I couldn't envision the path forward. When Dad married Jill in the 1980s, long after his space career was over, we acquired a new family, which included my stepsister Tamara and her husband Jeff. While they were having their kids, Catherine and Cole, my husband Bill and I were having our 2 sons, Will and Danny. The 10 of us had so much fun together. We spent time in the summer at their houses in Vero Beach in Florida and Grand Rapids and Gun Lake up in Michigan. Dad pulled his grandkids behind his boat on Gun Lake and also trucked around Disney World and Universal and Epcot with strollers and whining and sunburns. It was a very different time than his frenetic years with NASA. On one of our many trips to Disney World, sitting by the pool, Dad told me that the biggest regret of his life was that he didn't get to spend more time with me while I was growing up. That was a defining moment. Not only was this something I had always wanted to hear from him, it was also the catalyst for a new phase of our relationship. In his book, Falling to Earth, Dad acknowledged with sadness that he'd chosen his career over his family. That might sound harsh, but it was cathartic for me. I already knew. As I grew older, my appreciation for Dad's accomplishments also grew. I realized that some little girls lose their fathers to war or drugs or prison. If I had lost mine back then, it was to something astounding, something historical, an extraordinary scientific accomplishment. In hindsight, there are so many exciting things I got to do and see because of Dad. I went to the White House and met the Nixons. I went to Camp David aboard Marine One. I met actors and authors such as Tom Hanks and Tom Wolfe. I even made friends with Fred Rogers. My dad and I worked hard to repair parts of our relationship that were either damaged or at best undernourished most of my life. I give him so much credit for that because he was a military man from a different generation with little room for vulnerability. Relationships had not been his strongest suit, but now he gained a new self-awareness and was expressing feelings that had not been in his skill set. Dad applied the same dedication to restoring our bond as he had to his other achievements. We became intentional about being together for holidays and vacations. We texted regularly, and he even learned to add clever emojis. He never again missed a birthday party, a graduation, an Eagle Scout ceremony, Christmas, or simply dinner at our house. We constantly found good reasons to go to each other's homes and go out for lunch, dinner, or a concert. He was always the one initiating plans with my sons anytime they were in town. We saw each other every week. We did everything in our power to make up for lost time. I treasured my dad. He was affectionate, funny, agreeable, easy to please, generous, complimentary, up for anything, humble. And I want you to know how courageous he was to open himself up to having a great relationship with his daughter. I suspect he was more comfortable speaking in front of a crowd or solving an engineering issue. One day, eating lunch at P.F. Chang's, we got into a heated discussion about our current political leadership. I suggested that we avoid that topic altogether. I told him, I don't want to spend my time with you arguing. He disagreed. Absolutely not, he said. I don't want us to have any topics that are off limits. We had that mutual respect and admiration. My dad was a dynamo. He was always on the go. He had conferences and speaking engagements all over the world. He was always telling me he was going to slow down after this next trip, the next anniversary event, or the next year. Bill and I joked about how it was never going to happen, and we were right. My dad didn't tell me how to live. He lived, and I learned from watching him. What did I learn? I learned the importance of setting goals, of requiring a lot from yourself, of being kind and humble, of changing with the times and being open to new things, of reconsidering how you've prioritized your life, of making things right. He made me laugh. He was a good friend and a good listener. I was always proud to have him around my friends. He was reliably charming, interesting, patient, and gracious. My dad and I adored each other. In the last year of his life, he moved back to Houston, where I live. Some might think it's a shame he didn't move here sooner. I say he got here just in time. Even when Dad was in the hospital during his final weeks, he was sweet, grateful, and good-natured. One time there, I said to him, "Well, you didn't think we'd be spending this much time together, did you?" Without missing a beat, he replied, "An unexpected bonus." A smooth talker, he was charming right to the end. He flirted with the nurses and physical therapists, and when he couldn't speak anymore, he flirted with his eyebrows. I am sad that my dad is gone. More so, I am so grateful for the relationship that I had with him. He was fun and flexible and everything I could want in a dad. He was proud of me and respected me. We loved each other, and he would be pleased to hear me say he was a hell of a good dad.
Thank you, Bill, for those great memories. You and the entire Worden family are truly blessed. And Allison, we all know that your dad would be absolutely beaming right now. Thanks again for those great words and stories. So many of us are familiar with Al's biography, but since he lived life to the fullest, every part of Al's life created a piece of the puzzle that made him whole. I'd like to ask Francis French, Al's friend and co-author of his biography, to briefly remind us of some of the highlights of Al's amazing career.
Thank you, Tom. You'd think that flying to the moon, would be enough of an accomplishment for one life, but Al Worden did so much more in his long life. I'm going to give you just a few highlights of that very, very diverse career. He ran a farm for his family, livestock, fields of grain, you name it, while he was still going to high school. He was a fighter pilot, a test pilot, and a test pilot instructor. So good that Chuck Yeager asked him to come and teach a test piloting school at Edwards before Al had even taken the class himself. He took the class while teaching it. The kind of test piloting Al did is the pinnacle of many piloting careers. It's pretty much the top of the heap. unless you go to space. When selected by NASA, he worked in the Apollo spacecraft after the devastating Apollo 1 fire, helping make sure it was safe enough to fly to the moon. He did his part years later as well to get the Apollo 13 crew home after the in-flight explosion in their spacecraft. As a support crew member and a backup crew member, he did a lot to ensure the success of the Apollo 9 and the Apollo 12 missions. He was the number 2 best handball player in the astronaut corps, beaten only by the unbeatable Mike Collins. At the same time, he was racing sports cars competitively with the likes of fellow astronaut Pete Conrad. After NASA, he published a book of space-themed poetry. In 1982, he ran for Congress. He later chaired the board of the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation, the ASF, who continued to support a new generation of students in achieving worldwide success. More recently, with his Coleman Scholarship, he's doing the same thing on a global scale. He's also a caregiver. If you saw the love and full-time care he gave to his wife Jill in her last years, you'll know exactly what I mean. He was a father and a grandfather, and if he was your friend, you knew it. Things happened when you were his friend. He took care of people. So Al had an amazing career. You can tell a lot about somebody, not just from their amazing resume, but how well they're remembered. And as you're hearing today, Al is remembered with a great deal of love.
24 people went to the moon, but 500,000 helped them make it there. Let's hear now from some of Al's friends and fellow NASA astronauts from Apollo all the way to the International Space Station.
Hi, I'm Jerry Griffin. It's a great honor to speak today about my good friend, Al Worden. He was a really, really neat guy, neat person, always fun. I met him in 1966, about the time he got to Houston. And I was, at the time, in Mission Control, trying to finish up the last of the Gemini flights. But it was really when we started flying Apollo that I got to know him really well. He was in the control center with us. By that time, I was a flight director in Apollo, and he was a Capcom on Apollo 9 and Apollo 12. So once you get inside that control center, it was pretty much like a pot that you just stirred us all together, and then I got to know him as a person much better. What I'll always remember about him is that laugh and the big hug. And, you know, it didn't make much difference whether you had seen him yesterday or 6 weeks ago or 6 months ago. I think it could be 6 years ago. When you saw him, it was like you saw him yesterday. Nothing changed. He was that consistent person. So last year was kind of I thought last time I saw him in Switzerland in the summertime, I thought everything was just going to keep going forever, I guess. So I'm going to miss him. He's left a hole, but he also had a great life and a great run that we would all be proud to say we had one as good. So with that, I'm just going to leave with the thought of Godspeed, Al. You were a great one.
We first met at NASA in 1966 when we joined the original 19. That was the 5th group of astronauts, and since we weren't so original, we called ourselves the original 19. We collaborated on our messages as we went around the country independently, but basically our messages to young people were to dream big, work hard, do your best, stay on the high road, and never, ever give up. Al was the kind of guy that would do anything for you. He made things happen. He got things done. He's a very outgoing person, a very good sense of humor. In fact, it was his character and his professionalism that earned him a position with the Coleman Worldwide Company and its establishment of the Al Worden Endeavor Scholarship for space camp in Huntsville, Alabama, to acquaint kids from many other nations with America. And I think that this is one of the most important and significant legacies elements of Al's legacy that he has left behind. By the way, the aircraft carrier that rescued Apollo 15 after its parachute failed, splashed down in the Pacific Ocean, Al wouldn't talk about it much, seldom spoke of it, but I will remind you of it today. In fact, the rescue ship was the USS Okinawa, a helicopter amphibious assault ship owned and operated by the U.S. Marine Corps. I want to thank you for this opportunity to join you for this special memorial tribute to me, a very special friend. Thank you.
I'm happy to join the celebration of life for Al Worden. Al and I met up something like about 58 years ago. We were both young test pilots at Edwards Air Force Base. We applied and were chosen for Group 5, which was known as the original 19, and reported to Johnson Space Center. I joined Al at about almost a year of training as rookies, and always enjoyed his presence. He's a very friendly, outgoing fellow, and you couldn't mistake a laugh Al had. If you heard that, you knew Al was around for sure. We were kind of worried when we got to Houston, looking at the number of people and the number of flights scheduled. Would we have a chance to make a flight, and at least an Apollo program? But Al and I, we were both very fortunate. We did get assignments for a flight to the moon during Apollo. I will miss Al, and we will all miss Al at some of the upcoming events for his liveliness and making life interesting.
Jerry, Jack, Fredo, thank you so much for joining us and for those glimpses into the Apollo program and the part of Al's life that meant so much to him. We mentioned that 500,000 people helped lift Apollo to the moon. One very special woman saw those guys off in grand style. One might say that she knew the Apollo crew members front side and backside. I'm referring to the beloved NASA Apollo flight nurse, of course, Dee O'Hara. Dee?
Hi, this is Dee O'Hara from San Jose, California. I met Al in 1966 when he joined NASA following his selection as an astronaut. He came over to the clinic, he introduced himself, turned in his Air Force medical records, and stayed for a chat. I thought, gee, what a nice guy. And it turned out my first impressions was right. 54 years later, Al was still a nice guy. Following the Apollo 15 mission, Al moved out to NASA Ames Research Center, which is located in Mountain View, California. He was such a kind, nice guy that when I chose to transfer out to Ames the following year, he volunteered to fly to Houston and drive me and my goofy dog out to California. And I had been granted a lateral transfer to Ames, and without Al, I swear I would probably still be looping the I-10 freeway. The drive out was certainly an adventure, to say the least. It was in the middle of the gas crisis, so we endured long lines to fill up, and Al had to endure my dog. And he teased me about that dog for the rest of his life. I was very sad to hear that Al was no longer with us. I've always liked crossword puzzles and the meaning of words. So when thinking of how to describe this remarkable man, I got out the Dictionary of Life and looked to see what it might have to say about Al Merrill Worden. I found the following definitions under his name. First one was courage. It takes courage to be a jet pilot and an astronaut. Not everyone could do it. The other word that was sitting there was salt, as in salt of the earth, and that he was. Perseverance was listed. He had this in spades. He was also a very good friend I'm not sure Al ever met a stranger. Eager. He was always eager to help someone in any way that he could. And he was also fun-loving. He was always ready with a laugh or for a party. I'm sure when they go to update Life's dictionary, 2 new entries will be listed under his name, that of author and poet. I shall miss him very much. Rest in peace, dear friend.
Thank you, Dee. It's great to have you with us today. Clearly you held a special place in Al's heart. For everyone's benefit, I'd like to share the poem Al wrote entitled Dee O'Hara.
The giants of the Apollo era loom just as large in NASA's collective memory today as they did 50 years ago. We continue to honor the 50th anniversary of the Apollo program's historic milestones and the shared triumph of sending astronauts to the moon. While on the ISS this past year, I was saddened to learn of Colonel Worden's passing, but privileged to honor him from our orbiting laboratory. Now, once again, NASA has set its sights on the moon and Mars, and we look to heroes and explorers like Colonel Worden as inspiration as we continue our quest to expand human presence in our solar system. On behalf of the Astronaut Corps, past and present, we honor Colonel Worden and his service to the nation. Ad astra per aspera.
Colonel Al Worden, he was a great individual, very good friend. He was a great American, Air Force officer, a great actor. We really enjoyed knowing him. For 57 years, we finally joined the astronaut group. We were always good friends. The only time we really worked together closely and the old original Block 1 spacecraft we were flying back in 1967. I was the backup commander for the second mission. I was backup to the city. And my crew, John Young, was being shot. Al Worden was a support team. I'll never forget. We were out in the spacecraft. I got out and said it was an emergency call. It was Worden. So you heard about the fire in the base. He said, no, they want fire. They really had a fire on the back. Well, he said, hey, you're not doing a lot for it. A couple of weeks. Yeah, I was dealing with this. I was thinking about the this. And I said, no, it was a place for that. The fire, the spacecraft. He said, what about the food? He said, no, we're all 3 dead. I can't believe this. It's true. Al, he can have a smile on his face. That was great. He did a good job there. He was back up at the Polo Club. The commander of the Grand Marshal pilot. So Al was up there all by himself 2 days. He the earth and he did a spacewalk. That could be anything I did. I always liked the astronaut scholarship.
Al made friends everywhere, especially in the United Kingdom, where he spoke at schools, on stage, and wherever and whenever he was invited. Al's enthusiasm and energy levels were legendary, as England's space community and his US colleagues can attest to.
I knew Al for only a few years, but his strength of personality and that keenness for whatever task was at hand really made a big impression. I first met Al with Vic Southgate and Alistair Scott. We shared an evening in a restaurant in East London. Now, it was the end of a long day. Al must have, been rather busy already that day, but his enthusiasm to discuss anything that the conversation turned to, that zest for being, for talking and just being there with other people, just shone through the whole evening. Al had nothing to prove. He'd done all that years before. He could just relax a bit and enjoy himself. And that's exactly what Al did.
I first met Al at New Scientist Live in London when I was a rookie astronaut, and Al was the first Apollo astronaut that I was going to meet. Quite an intimidating experience until, of course, I actually met Al and realised what a kind, friendly, warm and funny person he was. He was brilliant to be around. Later that day, I had to dock the Soyuz simulator in the exhibition hall. Lots of people watching, and I was feeling under a lot of pressure. Suddenly somebody else came alongside me, and I felt them breathing over my shoulder and nudging my arm, trying to put me off. And of course, it was Al stood there with a wicked grin on his face. His stories about spaceflight, and in particular, I remember him recounting his EVA experience, that deep space EVA, just filled me with so much inspiration. I was on stage with Helen Sharman and Al. We were answering questions, and among them about a trip to Mars, a future trip to Mars. And you could just feel the enthusiasm that he still had for human spaceflight and his desire to get back into a rocket and travel off out into the solar system. You'll be sorely missed, Al, by friends and family alike, but you've touched our hearts and you've brightened our lives. So it was an absolute honour and a privilege and a pleasure to have known you.
Hi, my name is Chris Lee, and I'd like to say a few words in memory of Al Worden. As Chief Scientist of the UK Space Agency, I've had the privilege to meet many astronauts, including several from Apollo. Al Worden was the one astronaut I most wanted to share a beer with or a quiet dinner after these events. Why? Because Al was simply great company. He had an easy way of listening, drawing on his own experiences to make the conversation as much about you and your views as his own, and I was always surprised about this. Throughout the meetings we had together, Al was thoughtful and humble about his space years and about what space exploration could offer us all in the future. However, I also recall he was supremely grounded. He could put his space years into their proper perspective as part of a rounded life. He was fun to be with. And that, for me, is what a role model is all about. Not a superhero on a pedestal, but someone we can all aspire to be. So let me simply say that for me, Al Worden will always be the man. And the world is all the poorer for his absence. Ad Astra, Al.
Hi, I'm Vic Southgate. I feel very privileged to have this opportunity to offer my heartfelt condolences to the Worden family and to speak about the Al I got to know. I only knew Al for 5 years, but they were a phenomenal 5 years. We became extremely close during that time, and I feel as if I've known him all my life. I met Al because our mutual friend Francis French had told me how great he was. I was doing a lot of outreach in junior schools at the time, and I had a STEM mascot that accompanied me when I met inspirational people. So of course, I took her to meet Al. Al and I got on really well from that first meeting, and after a couple of months of chatting and planning an event in the UK, he asked me to be his European manager. Well, how could I refuse? He was so full of life. He had so much energy. I was slightly concerned whether I'd be able to keep up with him or not. But Al and I did over 40 events in our short time together. and I had the great pleasure of observing him in many different situations. But regardless of where we were, there was one thing that shone through, and that was his natural ability to befriend anybody. I wish we'd done more together, and I wish I'd travelled to the US more. But Al was always so energetic. I guess I assumed we had more years together. I guess this year reinforced something that Al used to say a lot. He used to say that flying to the moon is just a skill, and skills can be learned. But the greatest challenge is how you live your life and what good you can do along the way. I guess we never know how much time we have left. And Al had already done a lot of good in his 88 years. And he'll continue to inspire through the Al Worden Endeavour Scholarship, which he launched last year. But Al was so generous with his time, and his love and his friendship. And I feel so privileged to have been even a small part of his wonderfully long life, and to witness firsthand how one person can make such a difference to the lives of many. I loved Al so deeply, and I miss him every day. I feel so lucky to have known him, but luckier still that I'm able to look up at the moon and remember all the fun and love and vodka that we shared. But my sincerest condolences go to all his family, and a special thank you to Alison. Your love and friendship over the past year has been amazing. And thank you also for sending me this shirt, which your dad wore at all our events last year. Your dad taught me so much about love and respect, human interaction and acceptance. I'll miss his unique view of life, unwavering support and unfaltering affection. Al put everyone he cared about before himself. He was a true gentleman, and the world needs more gentlemen like Al. All my love to my dearest friend, Ad Astra Al.
Hello, this is Richard Garriott. Growing up a few blocks outside the front gates of NASA, it's easy to believe that space travel was the manifest destiny of us all, as so many of our parents were involved in supporting or flying personally into space. I, like many children of astronauts, felt culture shock when I went off to college and met more normal people involved in more normal life. Only then did I begin to reflect upon the unique and wonderful opportunities of our special upbringing. My childhood neighbor, Al Worden, was a friend and mentor to many. I often played with his children in my youth, and I've known Al pretty much my whole life. But while many of the astronauts I looked up to as a child were a bit Spock-like, and perhaps a bit distant, like my dad, my memories of Al are that he was always full of love and laughter for all. Al seemed to never tire of sharing his joys and passions about spaceflight. He will be missed.
My name's Larry McGlynn, and I've known Al Worden for a number of years, and we'd gotten to know each other from the time I became a custodian of his spacesuit patches from Apollo 15, and we just clicked. And I think everybody will tell you whenever they met Al, they just clicked. Al was just that type of guy. He liked people and people liked him. When he fell ill, even though I had talked to him about twice a month, when he fell ill, I didn't get a chance to talk to him after that. And I dearly miss those conversations, and I dearly miss him. And I think this celebration of life is perfect because it represents Al and his personality and his friendship.
Al and I have been friends for quite a number of years. He wrote the foreword for my last book, and he and I have had a very unique collegial type relationship. I've met a lot of famous people over the years. Very few, if any of them, can say they were one of just a handful of people to do something that was really unique, and something that only a handful of people have actually ever done. And of the 24 people who actually made the journey to the moon, Al was truly unique amongst that small group. He could have easily been arrogant. He could have been cocky. He could have been standoffish, but he wasn't. He was just the opposite of all that. And Al did a lot of things because I think he truly cared about the people, of all people. I mean, whoever he came in contact with, I think he saw them as a friend and was willing to do whatever he could to help them in some way. Because he was what I would define as a servant leader. You know, he would always put people first, other people first, always. And his personality and his approach to life is what made him contagious. I mean, people everywhere loved Al. I never knew anybody who did not love Al. And people then followed him and literally flocked to him because of who he was as a person. And I very much miss my friend. I cannot tell you how much I miss my friend, and especially that raspy laugh of his. That raspy laugh is what always put a smile on my face every time I heard it. Al was one of a kind. Al, I miss you.
Thank you, Tony. Al was really generous with his time, supporting organizations big and small, including the Space Station Museum in California and a very remote interest group that caught his interest in far-off Lufgers. This time of year, America normally turns its attention to college football, and we all know what that meant for Al Worden. Al loved Big Ten football and his University of Michigan Wolverines, and he and two other astronauts were given very special homecoming treat last year at the Big House in Michigan Stadium. But nothing was more important to Al in Michigan than his roots and his family there. And homecoming meant coming home to his daughter Tamara Christians and her family there in Grand Rapids. Let's hear some of the fond memories and stories Tamara and her daughter Catherine have to share.
Hi, I'm Tamara. My mom, Jill, was married to Al for 31 years until she passed away. During that time, people would ask me, how did they meet? Well, we were living in North Palm Beach, Florida at the time, and my mother was asked by her friends to go to a campaign fundraising party for this astronaut named Al Worden, who was running for Congress. Her reply was, I'm not interested in meeting an arrogant astronaut, but she was convinced to go. And at that party, the host physically picked her up, carried her over, and plopped her down in front of Al. And that was when they were officially introduced. First words out of my mother's mouth was to tell Al that she did not believe the United States government should continue funding the space program. And he calmly and kindly explained to her all the reasons why NASA was so important and why the funding should continue. What do I remember about that night? Being sound asleep and awakened by my mother, who was in the closet going through my shelves, looking at the encyclopedias. Yes, she was checking up to see whether or not Al was the real deal. And as you know, Dad was the real deal.
Hi, my name's Catherine. I was Al's only and favorite granddaughter. I was so fortunate to have the amount of time with Grandpa Al that I did. He was an amazing person and had so much knowledge to give and taught me so much. I wrote down a couple things closer to the time of his passing that I wanted to share. And this is writing to him. I first of all want to thank you for the memories you've given me. You and Grandma worked so hard to make my childhood so happy and eventful. I loved our Florida trips to the Vero Beach house because it meant that Grandma would force you to put on a swimsuit, which was a very rare sight to see, but it meant that you were playing in the pool with us, and it was the best. I also loved our Wednesday night sleepovers in the summer when we would play card games and run around the golf course. I'm so thankful that all of my memories with you are happy and silly, and that you taught me to live life in that way. I also want to thank you for teaching me to be independent and passionate. I was so fortunate to witness your work ethic firsthand and truly see the positive outcomes on working hard. You taught me to work towards something that I am passionate about and that I am willing to dedicate my life towards. And while I'm still trying to figure it out and wish that I could ask you for guidance, I know that you will be following me forever and help me when the time is needed. Grandpa, I miss you. I love you. I think about you every day. You still are teaching me so much to this day, and I am so incredibly thankful for you and thankful for everyone who is a part of this today. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Tamara and Catherine. Those are great photos and memories of your dad and granddad. And Catherine, speaking of Grandpa Al in his bathing suit, check out this photo we found of your grandfather in a, quote, bathing suit. If Al was alive today, I'd ask him, dude, what were you thinking? Maybe he lost a bet or something, I don't know. Aside from that outfit, Al was a real rock star, and no stranger to movie sets and rock stars. He was the original Rocket Man, as shown here, this photo of Al escorting Sir Elton John around Johnson Space Center. From Elton John to Tom Wolfe, John Travolta, Tom Hanks, to this gentleman here, Frank Haribo.
I'm the director of the documentary film The Fallen Astronaut. That's a film about a little sculpture on the moon. The sculpture is designed by the Belgian artist Paul van Hooijdonk, and it has been put on the moon by the Apollo 15 crew. I started working on the film about 5 years ago, and one of the first interviews that I made was with the command module pilot of Apollo 15, Alfred Worden. And during the interview, Al and I discovered that we shared a great mutual interest in poetry and music, and especially Beatles music. And I was wearing this t-shirt or this shirt, and since Al was very helpful with this production and helping me with research, I had to promise him that he would receive my shirt at the end of the film by the premiere. Unfortunately, Al has died about 5 weeks before the release of the film. I would really like to dedicate my film to Al, and I would very much like you to listen to Al reading one of his beautiful poems now.
What are astronauts? What am I? Hero, pilot, explorer, in love with myself and with my work, unheeding the many dangers that lurk in outer space and here on Earth, I accept all as due my birth. Magnificent performance on lunar surface belies my need of an earthly purpose. Accepting gifts as my just reward, taking gray money to be on the board. I do my job way out in space, but God forgive the friends erased.
Al had such a storybook life, from its Norman Rockwell start, as Carolyn mentioned, to his re-entry to Earth on August 7th, 49 years ago. And 20 years ago, Al met up with author and fellow space enthusiast Francis French, who we heard from earlier today. And in 2011, they co-authored Falling to Earth. Francis, for those of us who only had a few chances to meet with Al and a few minutes here and there, how much fun was it to be able to sit with him and go through his entire life story? You're one of our luckier presenters today. Thank you for the great role you played through your book, allowing us all to know and understand Al Worden that much better.
I only knew Al in the last 20 years of his life. At first, I thought I might be meeting someone whose glory days were behind him. I couldn't have been more wrong. Al used every minute of his long, rich life to the fullest. It's something I plan on remembering and learning from, like so many other things I learned from him. When I met Al, he had a burning need to reclaim a legacy that had been snatched away from him decades earlier. He certainly did that and more. For the last decades of his life, he had a peace and satisfaction that had in the past been unjustly denied. But those of us who knew him and knew his story knew that while he had to do this for himself, he didn't have to prove a thing to us. We knew his integrity, his West Point sense of honor and duty. He knew how much he was already respected and loved, and I had to think he'd now know how much he would be mourned. Even at 88, Al was never going to slow down. At one point a few years ago, he bought a beautiful home in Michigan on a golf course. He could have relaxed and just played golf every day, but not Al. He was much too restless. He sold the house, He moved back to Houston to be near his family and started traveling the world again. People like him never retire. Not because they don't know how, but because they don't want to. Until the last weeks of his life, he remained active, energetic, and keen to continue his work around the world, energizing and inspiring young people in STEM careers. Those of us who worked with him, many half his age or less, could barely keep up with his energy and his fast pace. So his death has left me with an odd mix of emotions, a sense that Al would have appreciated the fact he never became an old man, forced to slow down, mixed with a sense that he's been cheated. He had so much more that he wanted to do. Orbiting the moon alone for 3 days, Al looked out at the universe and gained a perspective no humans ever had in such depth before. What he experienced in those hours is a glimpse into a wider universe we've only just begun to explore. It will be centuries until most of humanity could even begin to understand what he felt in person. When you write a book with a guy late in life, you're aware it might turn out to be, in some ways, the last word. We ended the book Falling to Earth with words that we both knew might be used for this purpose. And now here we are. And now here are these words. Of all the places I've traveled, it's still hard to beat a Michigan summer. I'd like to walk in the woods and fields just as I did as a kid back on the farm. Except now I'm not alone. On a warm evening, I'll be with my children and their children. Sitting on the grass, I can feel the living soil as I put my hands on it. There's new life there, new potential, waiting to grow. It's comforting. Sometimes while I sit and enjoy the good company of my family, the moon will slowly rise above the trees. I generally don't pay it much thought, but occasionally I'm reminded of my brief glimpse into infinity while alone on the moon's far side. I still have lingering questions about what I experienced. The answers won't come in my lifetime. That will be your job. Try it sometime. Someday, all of us who journey to the moon will be gone. Take a walk on a summer night, look up at the moon, and think of us. Part of us is still there, and always will be.
Part of us is up there, and always will be. No one on Earth knows that better than the man who has walked on the moon, and indeed left a beautiful photo of his wife and family on the lunar surface. Lifelong friend of Al's and fellow Apollo astronaut, Charlie Duke.
It's an honor for me to be here and able to share with everyone on this virtual tribute to my good friend, Worden. My wife Dottie and I send our love and prayers to Carol, Alice, and Tammy. We miss giving you a hug on this day. I first met Al in 1964. Alan had just graduated from the Empire Test Pilot School and had come to Edwards Air Force Base to join our class, Class 64 Charlie. For the last 6 months of our training is in the aerospace part of the Test Pilot School. So Al and I became really good friends there, and we had a great class. Al was one of the top competitors in our class. We were very competitive. We all worked really hard to learn how to be a test pilot. And so our friendship grew considerably there in the next 6 months. We graduated in late August, early September, as I recall. And the very same month in September, NASA announced that they were going to have another astronaut selection. So about 12 of us were graduated in class for Charlie. 4 of us ended up as NASA astronauts. 3 of us went to the moon, and the 4th, Hank Hartsfield, flew several times on a space shuttle. Of those 4, I'm the only one left here on this earth. I miss every one of them very, very much. It was a great opportunity for all 3 of us, and Al did an exemplary job on Apollo 15, and I was so proud of him. He was the first to do a in-space EVA on the way back from the moon, and again did a fantastic job. It has been a pleasure for me throughout the years to have been friends with Al. He was probably one of the most likable guys I knew. He was always friendly, always interested in all you were doing, and never had an unkind word that I'd heard for anyone. We both liked to play golf in our spare time, but unfortunately we weren't very good at it. But we were better astronauts than we were golfers, but we had a great time doing that. Al and I did stay in touch. Through reunions and personal phone calls, kept active in each other's lives, if you will. I really owe all of our astronauts in the Apollo program owe Al a great debt of thanks. After Apollo 16, NASA confiscated all of the personal articles that we carried to the moon with us. And if it weren't for Al getting involved and demanding NASA to return them, and with a threatened lawsuit, NASA would still have them. But they were all given back to us. And so I really miss Al. He was a great friend, a great astronaut, great compatriot, great American. And so I miss you, Al. You were a great friend. When I end up taking that last flight, when I get loose of the surly bonds of Earth and fly off, I look forward to joining up with you and getting back in formation and renew our friendship. Godspeed, my friend. I love you.
Thank you, Charlie. It was great fun celebrating Apollo 11's 50th with you and Al and Walt Cunningham, who I know is watching this morning. Hi, Walt. In Paris in June of 2019. Paris was only one of many destinations for Al. He loved traveling to the very end. Please enjoy this last segment of the celebration, which shows Al doing what Al loved to do, traveling the world and telling his stories. We call it Around the World with Coleman Worldwide.
My dear Al, this is Gilles. You left for your last flight. I know that now you are sailing somewhere between the stars. You leave us alone. We will not forget you. You were a real ray of sunshine for all of us. I will never forget your visits to our beautiful exhibition, the Paris Air Show, that you loved so much. Your kindness, charisma, and warmth amazed all of the staff and visitors you met here. You are someone unique, and you have managed to keep a teenage soul and a sense of freedom that is so special to you. I will not forget our flight with 6 planes to the beaches of Normandy and towards Mont Saint-Michel with Tom. I know that day you were a happy man. The celebration of Apollo 50th anniversary with Charles Duke and Walter Cunningham last year in Paris was also a great moment for all of us. Thank you, Al, for everything you gave us, for what you have shared through your life. Have a good flight, old brother. We will not forget you, and we love you so much.
At Coleman Worldwide, we work hard.
And we party hard as well.
So that's why Al fit right in.
Remember the first time we brought Al to the Farnborough Air Show? I remember he was so excited because it was his first time back at Farnborough in almost 50 years. And I think the thing he was excited about the most was finding the pub that he used to go to on the weekends when he was living there in a place called Crookham Village.
Yep, that was great. You worked so hard to get him back to his old local pub and to keep it a surprise.
We sure did. In fact, Tom and I drove Al all over the village stalling for time so everyone could get there and be ready to yell, "Welcome back, Al," once he arrived.
Yeah, and as I recall, he was surprised.
Oh, he was surprised, but not for the reason you would think. It ended up being the wrong pub.
Oh, geez, the wrong pub. But at least we got the vodka right.
Cheers,
Cheers, Al.
We love
you and miss you.
I was very fortunate to get to know Al Worden closely during his visit to the UAE in 2017. Not only he was generous with his time, but he was also inspiring to our students and to everyone he crossed paths with. Al was a humble person. He was kind and enthusiastic to share his interesting stories and experiences with those he met, especially his exciting journey to space. He quickly grew to become a beloved friend, not only to me, but to my family as well, and we kept in touch ever since. During our final meeting at the Dubai Air Show, Al announced his scholarship to a selected number of students from the UAE to attend the space program in Alabama. That was in collaboration with the UAE Space Agency. 2 of our students and a teacher were nominated, and I hope he knew how much it meant to us and to them, and what a great honor it was. In that same trip, Al shared with me his health problem, and being an enthusiastic person, he was hoping to a full recovery. I didn't know it would be our last meeting. Al may have gone, but his spirit is alive within us, and his legacy will endure. The world will always remember him. We will always remember him. May he rest in peace.
About 5 years ago, I started going around the world with Colonel Al Worden. I met him in
came here to Paris, we went to London, we went to Dubai, we went to China, we've been around the world talking about STEM and getting kids inspired. This is the kind of guy that I'm dealing with, a guy that's been on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood 11 different times because he wanted to help inspire kids. Today, some of you might know we presented a flag flown to the moon to our friends at SIAE. We've presented flags that Al flew to the moon to the Royal Air Force. We've been presenting gifts to different host nations for a number of years, and we kind of came up with an idea and said, you know what, moving forward, let's put together a scholarship. We were announcing today the astronaut Al Worden Endeavor Scholarship, and with that scholarship, we'll be flying 4 children and 1 teacher from each of those nations to Huntsville, Alabama, to the space camp. So Al, you've been an inspiration of ours, and as long as Coleman Worldwide is organizing pavilions around the world, kids are going to be showing up down there. We named it the Endeavor Scholarship, obviously after his command module, Endeavor.
I'm here with Coleman Worldwide. They provide the U.S. Pavilion here at the Dubai Air Show. As part of that, we started a scholarship program, which we hope will further cooperation between us and lots of countries. We now have 8 countries that we're working with, and what we do is we have them select 4 students and a teacher, and then we pick them up and take them to space camp with the hope that we will excite these kids about space. They will come back and talk about it, and we will begin to direct these young people into science, technology, engineering, math. I thought Dubai was the perfect place to have the first introduction of students into our program.
It was. Dr. Alababi and the space agency, the UAE Space Agency, were so proud to be involved. They were smiling ear to ear as he announced the names of the students and the teachers. We were honored and pleased that the U.S. Ambassador, Ambassador Ricolta, was able to be on hand, and immediately he wanted to be part of it, and he was thrilled to put the jackets on the kids and on the students, and they got a wonderful certificate. Handshake from Al and a photo, and it was really just a good afternoon.
It's a great start to something that will end up being worldwide. We'll be doing the same thing over and over with all these other countries, but that was a wonderful start to a growing program, which we hope will have a significant impact on those of the next generation.
As we wrap up today's event, I wanted to add a few words of my own to the list of adjectives and adverbs that have been used to describe Al, and maybe put a bit of a twist on things. We've heard for the last hour about how full of life, how kind and respectful and energetic Al was, and the many ways that who he was and how he conducted himself made such a positive impact on us and the world around him. To me, of course, Al Worden was special, in many of the same ways you all have described. He was super intelligent, well-read, and always raring to go. But Al himself has said he wasn't that special. He possessed the same talents all of us possess. And what Al did with those talents, we can all do. Live life to the fullest, love, laugh, be there for others, give generously of our time, inspire the next generation to follow their passion, be encouraging to others, full of energy, stay connected and be friendly. We heard so many people talk about how Al did all those things and more. And there's nothing stopping us from doing the same. So I'm going to use the opportunity that I had with Al, the reflections of his life, to be a better person myself. To me, Al represents hope. Not only in the idea that with hard work and some good fortune, one can rise to the stars, but hope in a time when so many are looking for ways to define our differences and highlight all that is not great in the world. I'm encouraged and full of hope that one person, like Al, can make a tremendous difference in the world. And if Al Worden can do that, I and the 916 of us at this celebration today can certainly do the same.
Well, now you know a little bit more about Al's adventures with Coleman Worldwide, and a lot about the Al Worden Endeavor Scholarship. That just about wraps up today's celebration of life. Tamara, I know that you and many of your family and friends are gathered up there in Grand Rapids. We hope you enjoyed the event. And of course, we wish you continued health and success. Catherine, go Spartans. And Will, thank you for the really nice musical tribute to your grandpa.
Allison, over to you for some closing comments.
It has been wonderful hearing from so many of Dad's friends and family, and just seeing how many people he inspired and impacted throughout his life. I want to thank you and the Coleman Worldwide team, Francis French and Vic Southgate, for all the time and energy that went into creating today's event. And of course, thank everyone who contributed and participated. Because of the large number of messages we received, I know we were only able to scratch the surface in terms of what we could include. But on behalf of all of my dad's family, all 3 generations, thank you so much for your kindness and condolences that we've received from the time he first went into the hospital until today. It has meant a great deal to us. And as you saw from the videos, what meant a great deal to my dad is the Endeavor Scholarship that was created in his name and honor. As Tom mentioned earlier, all of us are part of the Al Worden legacy, but that is especially true for the students and teachers who will travel to Space Camp in Huntsville with Dad's patch on their jackets and flight suits. Not only will they have a great STEM experience, but they will build international friendships that help make the world a better place. And that is what my dad did and what his dream was. So thank you in advance for any way you can help support that goal and the Al Worden Endeavor Scholarship. Now, before we sign off today, I'd like you to meet the first 12 Endeavor Scholarship recipients.
Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth
and danced the skies on laughter's silver wings.
Somewhere, I climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of science-split clouds.
And done 100 things you have not dreamed of.
Wheeled and soared and swung high in sunlit silence.
And hovering there, I've chased the shouting wind along.
And flung my eagle graph through fruitless halls of air.
Up, up, the long delirious burning blue.
I've topped the windswept heights with easy grace, where never lark or even eagle flew.
And while with silent, lifting mind,
I climbed the high untrespassed sanctity of space.
Put out my hands and touch the face of God.